Omega is in a state of disarray, and I don't think they know it yet. The Omega Aqua Terra Worldtimer with a ceramic green or anthracite bezel is a cool watch, but also a symptom of many of their challenges. There's so much to unpack here. Worldtimer dials, value for money, the watch, and most importantly, the state of Omega. So sit back, grab your beverage of choice, and hold on tight because this is going to be a controversial one. Worldtimers are an interesting breed of watch. If you don't know Worldtimer watches, they're a breed of watch where you can, at a glance, instantly tell the time in multiple places in the world, usually across the span of a 24-hour day. Worldtimers are also kind of special because it's one of those watches where designers have hugely varying implementations as to how to interpret them. Case in point, a GMT. Add an extra hand, slap on a 24-hour bezel, or put the 24 hours somewhere on the dial. Then you have a GMT. Now, the Worldtimers are a whole lot more complicated. Do you have a globe on the dial? Is it an accurate globe, or is it stretched out in some way to assist in reading time for cities? Do you actually add the cities' names? Do you differentiate the names in some way based on whether or not they have daylight savings or not? Do you have a 24-hour ring? All of the above questions lead into the key challenge for Worldtimers, making a dial look harmonious. You'll be hard-pressed to find another complication that makes a dial more busy than a Worldtimer. Do it badly and you have a hideous cluttered dial that hurts the eyes. Do it well and you're a genius. It's that hard to create harmony when you're trying to communicate so much information on a teeny tiny dial. You get a true Worldtimer with globe, 24-hour discs, cities on the outer ring of the dial. It's 43 millimeters with a 50 millimeter lug to lug, 14.1 millimeter height, and 21 millimeter lug width. It has water resistance down to 150 meters. The power reserve is 60 hours, and depending on the model, will set you back from somewhere around $9,000 and up. In total, and in keeping with Omega's modus operandi, you get 7 different configurations to choose from. The entry model has a steel bezel, and the 2 new models have either a green or a dark gray / anthracite ceramic bezel and corresponding color matched dial. The rubberized strap is the best in the business. This comes down to the polished center link at the lug connection point, but also down to the stitched edge and the center pattern design. It has a ton of character and it just looks great. It also feels great. It's soft, it's supple, and it's pleasant on the skin. I love it to bits. Some might think it's a little bit busy, but to me, I think it's totally in keeping with the watch overall, and it just exudes an attention to detail and willingness to do more than just deliver a plain tapered rubber strap. The case itself is excellently finished. You have the characteristic curved Omega lugs, chamfering combinations of high polish and brushed surfaces that create reflections in all the right places. The dial is absolute top-notch. You have the trademark teak deck dial creating that visually consistent design ethos that connects this watch to the regular Aqua Terras. The teak deck travels north to south on this model in a curved fashion to remind you of the globe that we all live on. The date window is color matched and at 6 o'clock, and on the green and blue version also curved on the outer edges from north to south. The titanium model forgoes the curved teak deck pattern and goes for a more matted textured gray pattern and a straight edged trapezoid date window. Fonts, colors, everything is in almost perfect harmony on any of the models, and I would go as far as to say that this is one of the most harmonious and elegant implementations of a Worldtimer on the market in any price bracket at the moment. I still believe that Omega's bracelets are their weakest link in general. They opt here for a 3-link bracelet, but yet again the polished center links are way too wide. Narrower and it becomes an oyster bracelet, I know, but the ratio of side link to center link is still off. The taper from 21 millimeters to 19 is, in my view, too little in the overall context of this watch. It bulks up the watch, which makes for a very manly wearing experience, but not necessarily in a good way. Then there's the ceramic. This is a clear case of jumping the shark as far as I'm concerned. I love the green and gold color of the dial. The green and gold implementation is absolutely stunning, and if you happen to be a South African and enjoy rugby, this watch should be the official timekeeper for the Springboks. The grey version also has a lot going for it dial-wise. I suspect though that the implementation of ceramic is to give an appearance of a watch with more dial real estate and also has to tone down the inherent chubbiness of this bezel. To me though, it just comes across as a step too far and it's just overpowering. The biggest problem with this watch though is the proportions. It's not the 43 millimeters in itself of the Worldtimer. For many with smaller wrists it will be an issue, but that's not the problem. I'm also going to accept the 14.1 millimeters in height to house the movement. Here's the thing. Compared to regular Aqua Terras, the watch feels more chubby, and there's a couple of reasons for this. The overall case size, and this is down to decimals, but it's important, has increased by precisely 4.87%. However, the lug width has increased by 5% and the lug to lug has increased by 5.01. That doesn't sound like a big difference, but the effect is that the watch just got fatter in the middle while the legs got relatively skinnier and longer. That's a bodybuilder who consistently skips leg day. Add to that on the green and blue models you have a teak deck that curves from north to south and a date window that also bulges at the sides. This just serves to accentuate the thick on the middle chubbiness of the watch. Put the regular AT side by side with the two other Worldtimers and I'll bet you'll notice the chubbiness immediately. The reason it isn't as pronounced on the titanium model is because of the more toned down palette and also the lack of the curves on the dial. To me, it reminds me so much of the problem that many people felt the Datejust 2 had. It was famously known and criticized for being a bit of a chunky monkey. It felt fat, and my guess is if you've seen this watch and thought something felt off about it, then this chubbiness, I think, is likely why. I vastly prefer the grey titanium over the steel green overall, although the green dial alone, standing on its own, is a stunner. But when we talk titanium, we talk grade 2 and grade 5. Grade 5 is better. I don't necessarily agree with that logic. I believe that both grades have their purposes and for watches either can be used flexibly. Grade 2 titanium is pure titanium, much like 24 karat gold is pure gold. Grade 5 is like 18 karat gold. It's titanium plus other metals creating an alloy that has different properties. In watches, those properties are not necessarily always preferable. Most importantly though, grade 5 is harder, it corrodes less, it's almost inert. This is why grade 5 titanium is used in medical bone replacement applications. You don't want something in your body that will rust, but unless you plan on swallowing your watch, I don't see it as an absolute necessity. Grade 2 will do fine for most applications. If you're going to be diving a lot in the ocean, you may want grade 5. If you want to be able to finish that titanium to a near steel polish that scratches less easily, like on the new Yachtmaster, you'll likely prefer grade 5. But grade 2 is more malleable, which means you essentially can twist it and shape it more easily, giving you some other options when it comes to shaping the case. Grade 2 also looks a little bit more rugged, a little bit darker, and is a little bit more, well, cheaper. So in some use cases, grade 2 may be preferable. In this watch, grade 2 is the right choice as far as I'm concerned. Grade 5 would have made this watch even more expensive anyway. And this titanium model is expensive enough as it is. The thing that gets me though is whether this Worldtimer should even have a titanium version. It makes sense that the Planet Ocean has a titanium option. It's a pro diver. But this Aqua Terra Worldtimer, is it a tool watch? Well, no, not really. Does it look cool in titanium? Absolutely. But I keep asking myself, where in the lineup is this Worldtimer supposed to be? This brings me neatly to talk about Omega's problems and how the Worldtimer is a symptom of all those problems. Now, before you kill me in the comments, I love Omega. I'm an Omega fan. They make tons of good watches. I'm not hating on their watches. I do, however, believe that if you love something or someone, your job is not to blindly accept everything they do as amazing. I think you have a duty to provide them with input when they're missing the mark or doing something wrong. Based on the annual Morgan Stanley report, we know a couple of things. Last year, Omega grew, but at a rate less than the industry average of the high-end players. 2 years ago, they lost their number 2 spot to Cartier. Omega has grown over the last 2 years, but not at the same rate as Rolex, not at the same rate as Cartier, not at the same rate as AP. In terms of overall revenue, they haven't kept up. In terms of volume, they haven't kept up. When you look at the retail value per watch, you see a similar picture. Cartier, Rolex, AP are all selling higher priced models. Omega, not to the same extent. Well, you might say, okay, but Omega just hasn't chosen to increase their prices as much as Rolex and Cartier. They're being consumer friendly. I just don't think that's the case. Why? Well, it would be true if they were then outpacing competitors in terms of volume growth, but they haven't. Most of the others have sold more volume and at a higher average price. People bought a whole lot more Rolex watches and more expensive Rolex watches from Rolex. But for Omega, people bought slightly more at a slightly higher price. They are underperforming, with those ahead of them increasing the distance to them and those behind rapidly catching up. I think the reasons are as follows. The Worldtimer is yet another complicated niche product to show off what Omega can do more so than to sell more watches. If you read Swatch Group's latest annual report, which I did, you'll know that Omega is positioned as Swatch Group's pioneer, blazing trails with innovations and daring ideas. Well, how are we seeing that? Well, we get a Mars timer in a specialized course movement that nobody cares about. We get a gorgeous, stunning, exquisite chiming chronograph that very few will ever get their hands on. You get spirate technology in a niche, oversized version of the Moonwatch. All these things are cool. Omega is demonstrating some sort of superiority, but the question is, over who? The Speedmaster Chime, is it a competitor to a Lange & Söhne Ratapante? The Worldtimer, who are they beating? Not Rolex, not Patek, Bulgari? The Spirate movement. Rolex doesn't care about certifications. They have their own standard. My point is this, they're launching innovations that to me seem more or less random and in all areas ultimately competing with everybody and nobody at the same time. It's very impressive and it generates some press. However, I'm not sure it actually leads to them selling more watches. Their most popular models are the Seamaster 300M and the Moonwatch. Both are 42mm. The Speedmaster Spirate version is 43 or 44mm. The two counter chronos, 43mm. The Worldtimer, 43mm. You can get Aqua Terras at 38mm, but a lot of their watches are just oversized. Even Panerai has launched Luminors and Radomirs in 40mm, while the flagship Omegas remain at 42 to 44mm. Titanium. You can get a Seamaster in titanium, for sure. It's priced at 70% above the regular 300M. That's because it's a Bond watch, but a titanium Ingenieur is only 25% more expensive than the steel option, 70% more. The Omega Aqua Terra Shades version in 38mm is $400 more expensive than the 41mm version. There are so many examples of Omega having stuff in their lineup that is priced weirdly or just not in line with current market trends in terms of sizing. Be original by all means, don't just give in to the trend of the day, but it just seems out of touch, and so does this Worldtimer. Which segment of the market actually asked for a Worldtimer? Variety equals a lack of focus. The Gents Aqua Terra alone comes in 42 different options. Omega has 74 different chronograph variations for men, excluding the Seamaster chronographs. This Worldtimer is in steel, two-tone, ceramic, gold and titanium. 7 options. It's already a niche product and it's available in 7 options. I can get frustrated with Rolex that in fairness could be criticized for having a lack of variety, and it's all oyster cases after all. Or Tudor that ultimately has the Black Bay in a ton of options and nothing else. But I think Omega's variety needs to be slimmed down. As a consumer, I love the variety, but they cannot possibly be making money on every individual watch they sell. I feel sometimes that Omega has a watch menu like the Cheesecake Factory menu. Any place that can sell you anything from Thai to Mexican to Italian to American to French, you can't possibly be good at everything. That's all I'm saying. That, and just because 2 collectors somewhere on the planet said, can we get this Worldtimer in titanium, does not make it a good business decision to do so. Also, a Worldtimer in titanium is cool, but what does that have to do with a semi-dressy watch? Worldtimers are typically luxury with a few notable exceptions like the IWC. They're not tools that need titanium. The variety adds nothing of value other than the variety in itself. Being a part of Swatch Group is a problem for Omega right now. Swatch is doing well with Glashütte that have been positioned very clearly in their hierarchy. They have a niche and they are servicing that niche really well. Same goes for Blancpain, Brequet, Longines, Tissot. Omega on the other hand, while trying to convince everyone that they can compete with Lange and the big boys, they're also in the trenches helping Swatch sell more budget quartz watches. The Morgan Stanley watch report is clear. The market for quartz watches is dying. Swatch stores were dying, obviously at their worst under COVID, where all stores were more or less empty. But walk-in sales of quartz watches is dead. The Moonswatch, which is not available online and never will be, was designed to get people back into those stores to buy more swatches. More watches in a dying market. Yes, they sold a ton of Moonswatches, almost 1 million. And Omega also had an uptick in sales of more Moonwatch, but I think it's a blip for Omega. In a market where quartz is dying and losing to smartwatches and all the other competitors are going for higher price per watch sales, while Omega faffs about branding a cheaped out version of their most iconic watch, how is this helping Omega? It's not. It's hurting Omega long term to be associated with Swatch watches. It's not helping them go upscale in any way, and it's defocusing them, and this Worldtimer is to me an example of this lack of focus. The Worldtimer dial alone is gorgeous. It's an artistic feat. It's excellent value for money for the quality in steel. The case, though, is too big for contemporary sensibilities. It's also chubby and not ideal aesthetically compared to the more balanced base Aqua Terra in 41mm or 38. Most of all, it's a symptom of everything that's wrong with Omega. Omega did not need to prove that they could put ceramic on a Worldtimer. Titanium in a Worldtimer is cool, but unfocused, directionless, and yet another option that very few, I think, were actually asking for. It's a lack of direction. It's weird market and pricing positioning. It's pioneering without purpose. If you like it, you like it. But Omega, I believe, are headed for trouble. Or I could be wrong, and this year is the year where their turnaround starts and they prove me wrong. I hope so, because I really do love their watches. That was my 2 cents. Let's hear what you think in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.